Okay, now that we understand the true meaning of unified endpoint management part of digital workspace environment, we're gonna shift our focus onto this second part called identity and access management as a service. And again, we've already agreed to uncover each and every concept in this list. In a way that explains its meaning, in case of a standalone solution, right? Now, identity and access management as a service as a standalone solution, right? In a corporate environment, we're not talking about small business here, we're just talking about larger corporations. Right? So in a corporate environment, usually there are dozens of high-level services the workforce, the corporate workforce interacts with. Right? So I might say service I don't know, like ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning solution. Service F, like CRM-like solution, Customer Relationship Management solution. Service X, something like email, communications, solutions, something like this, right? So, in a corporate environment, workforce needs to access all these services, and there are dozens of services in a corporate environment. It's a good idea to claim that each and every service almost equals to a certain business application. So this is my business application. So it's fair to say that in a corporate environment there are dozens of business applications that provide high-level services to corporate workforce. So basically, the workforce needs to access all these business applications to perform its duties, right? At the same time, that means all these applications are coming from different groups of developers. Some of these applications are custom made, some of these applications are out-of-the-box applications. So we have this diversity, this heterogeneous set of business applications. Right? This diversity is might be characterized by this. So some business applications are mainframe based. Some of these applications are open systems based. Some of these applications are Windows based. Some of these applications are Unix based. Some of these applications are so you might continue, right? But I'm going to focus on a specific characteristic of this diversity, characteristic related to the access control. Right? For example, some business applications have no means to control the access at all. So no access control versus some access control functionality. Some business applications are capable of controlling the access to its services, but in a way that does not allow a business application to delegate a certain functionality of access control. For example, I cannot delegate the authentication to an external entity. I cannot authenticate the authorization logic to an external entity, right? So access control delegation, no versus no access control delegation, right? Some business applications can delegate the access control functionality to external entity, but for example, using Kerberos protocol only. So we are using this term Kerberized business applications versus non-Kerberized. Some business applications are capable of delegating both authentication and authorization using SAML logic. So these are SAML compliant or business applications, and some business applications are not. So I would say there's usually a diversity of business applications in the corporate environment in terms of controlling the access, right, to business application services. And we do need to control the access, right? Because that's a mandatory security service. That is absolutely required to implement any generic security policy, right, requirements. So this diversity in terms of controlling the access severely complicates the job of human resources, IT, information security departments. Related to access provisioning and deprovisioning. So you might think, as of this scenario, so Kuzma is a new employee, right? Kuzma is hired to perform a certain job role, right? So we need to coordinate the tasks implemented by all these departments for provisioning the access for a newly hired employee to all these services. So Kuzma is going to be a manager in a sales department. So Kuzma needs to access the subset of services. Right? So we need to coordinate the tasks across all these departments. And of course, if we're looking at this slide, we understand that these tasks are sort of error prone and labor intensive. Right? From a technical perspective, you might say, okay, right, so there are some tasks that must be formalized, put on paper and implemented according to these paper-based documents in each and every department. from a technical perspective, right? Kuzma must be assigned the privileges to access this service, that service, but according to our diversity, right? You might say, oh my God, Kuzma needs to access a certain service, but this service is presented by business application that has no means to control the access to its data, to its services. And Kuzma needs to access service F, but this service is capable of controlling the access, right? This business application is capable of controlling the access to its services, but in a way that does not allow this access control logic to be delegated to a centralized entity. And you may continue this set of complications. All right. So basically we are dealing with access provisioning problem. So here we need to establish a new front end that is capable of implementing these access control decisions. Here we need to use a different entity that controls the access, since no access control delegation is allowed. Here we are allowed to delegate the access control logic to an external entity, but only using Kerberos. So that implies that for access provisioning problem we need to create multiple accounts for this Kuzma employee in distinct zones of access control. So Kuzma is gonna get one account here, one account here, one account there. So basically many accounts for a single employee to access different services. And these accounts must be synchronized in terms of logins and passwords, or at least they should be synchronized, right, for Kuzma's convenience. Because if these logins and passwords are not synchronized, Kuzma is gonna be in a very uncomfortable environment. So when Kuzma is trying to access this service, he must use a certain login and password. A different service, a different login and password. So again, it's error prone, it's prone to risks, all kinds of information security risks. And now think about Kuzma changing his position in our company. Kuzma is transferred from the sales department to a marketing department, a different role, different position. That means different set of privileges and permissions, right? So again, this whole set of departments is involved in access deprovisioning. According to information security best practices, we need to revoke Kuzma's access from all the previous services, right? And reassign new privileges, new permissions, according to Kuzma's new job role, Kuzma's new position, right? And again, that's error prone and labor intensive. Right? And I don't know, think about Kuzma leaving our company. Again, several departments are involved. All these departments must properly deprovision Kuzma's privileges and permissions, right? And again, it's error prone and labor intensive. So it's a mess. It's a mess. Right? More than this, if we're talking about identity and access management set of problems, we may easily add SSO. SSO stands for single, sign-on. Again, the idea is pretty simple. Oh my god, Kuzma, an employee, Kuzma does not... It's a bad idea to force Kuzma to use different accounts to access different services, different access credentials. That's sort of a recipe for disaster. Right? It's more convenient, more secure to give Kuzma, to provide Kuzma a single login and a single set of credentials. And when Kuzma starts his workday, right? Usually he encounters a prompt for credentials. Kuzma completes the authentication process, right? And as a result, his authentication session lasts till the end of the day. And when Kuzma is trying to access different services, for example, no one asks Kuzma, no one prompts Kuzma for credentials. But authentication happens, but transparently to Kuzma. Right? But again, that requires a certain centralized entity that is capable of manipulating all these different credentials across this diverse set of isolated zones of control. So the solution for our set of problems related to access provisioning, deprovisioning, related to single sign-on, related to this error-prone, labor-intensive tasks to implement this access provisioning, deprovisioning. The solution was the solution emerged in early 2000s, right? So, and the name for this solution that automates the tasks for access provisioning, deprovisioning, single sign-on, initially it was called a gatekeeper. So I'm gonna erase this. So the idea is pretty simple. Let's keep all these diverse set of business applications in the backend. Let's introduce a new front end. Here's my front end. Basically, it's a single point of access to all our business applications, to all corporate services. Single point of access for our employees. So if you are an employee of our company, if you need something, if you need a certain service, go to the single point of access. Usually the single point of access is accessible via a web browser and a certain URL. Right? This front end, being a single point of access to all the corporate services, is capable of implementing this access control logic. Right? So I'm a generic employee, generic user. If I want to access a certain service, I go to this single point of access. Right? The single point of access is capable of implementing access control logic. Right? I mean, identification, right? Authentication, authorization, and accounting. So when I access this front end, so there's a prompt for credentials. So who are you? I'm Kuzma. So proof that you are Kuzma. For example, using one-factor password-based authentication or multi-factor authentication, doesn't matter, right? And then this frontend is gonna perform this authorization decision, whether I'm allowed to access this frontend or not. If I'm allowed to access this frontend, I see a certain catalog of services, right? And in an ideal environment, the only services that are rendered within this catalogs interface are the services that I'm authorized to access, right? So, for example, if I'm not authorized to access service X, right, the graphical representation of this service, right, is not rendered at all. All I see is these icons that represent service A, service F, etc. Right? Cool. So at the same time, this gatekeeper, we call this frontend that implements access control logic for all our backend services, a gatekeeper. So this gatekeeper is integrated with all these backend services or business applications. For example, for a business application that has no means to control the access to its services, no problem. Gatekeeper is going to implement this logic. Right? For business applications that are capable of implementing access control logic but cannot delegate this logic to an external entity, no problem. Our gatekeeper has a plugin, right, to create to automatically create a local account, local to this application for Kuzma within a business applications database and assign a certain role with privileges and permissions. For business applications that are Kerberized, we have a plugin for Kerberos. Yes, now these Kerberized business applications can delegate authentication logic to our gatekeeper. For modern SAML compliant business applications, we have a plugin for SAML. According to SAML terminology, our gatekeeper can implement the logic of identity provider and leave the service provider role for business application. Right? So, as a result, we have a single entity that controls the access to all the diverse set of business applications. And this entity is usually equipped with a certain open-based standardized API, application programming interface, that can be used to integrate this entity with HR department's system, information security department system, information technology department system. So basically, when a new employee is hired, again, Kuzma is going to fulfill the position of sales department manager. So the moment Kuzma is officially hired, right? So this event is originates in HR system. There's a trigger, right? There's a command coming from HR system to this gatekeeper. Hey, gatekeeper, there's a new employee, Kuzma. Kuzma is going to perform a role of Kuzma is going to fulfill the position of sales department manager. Hey, please provision the access for Kuzma. And that translates into a set of predefined standardized tasks. Hey, let's create an account for Kuzma in this local database. hey, let's create an account for Kuzma in this gatekeeper's database. Or not in the database, or not in gatekeeper's database, but somewhere in our directory service, like Active Directory. Okay. Right. Since we usually have this centralized corporate directory service as a single origin for all the entities or identities in our environment. Right? Okay. And now, in a matter of, I don't know, seconds, all this access is provisioned automatically by the gatekeeper without direct human interaction. And when Kuzma changes his position in our company, or leaves the company, this access is deprovisioned automatically as well. And don't forget about single sign-on. Right? Since we have this integration of everything in the backend with our gatekeeper, single sign-on is possible. Now we can configure the single sign-on logic. Think about defining the number of prompts for credentials for a certain user trying to access certain service according to certain conditions. Interesting. Initially, these solutions were called gatekeepers, but again, by the year of 2010, right, some gatekeepers evolved into something new. Right? So some gatekeepers evolved to identity managers. What differentiates identity managers from gatekeepers? A delta of functionality. This delta is usually a vendor specific, but here we may claim that the major differentiator is multi-factor authentication. Yes, we not only support one-factor password-based authentication, we do support multi-factor authentication. Smart cards, certificate-based authentication, token-based authentication, any combination, right? Biometric. What else might be in this delta? Conditional authentication. What does it mean? The idea is pretty simple. Since we have this single point of access, single front end, to access all the backend business application, all the backend corporate services, we may define the strength of authentication we may apply a predefined strength of authentication according to a certain conditions. So for example, think about a generic end user using a trusted desktop located in a trusted network. So if you are trying to access our front end using a trusted desktop, trusted endpoint located in a trusted network, then we don't need to apply a strong authentication. For example, your desktop is already, your session is already authenticated using Kerberos. There's no reason, for example, to prompt you for your credentials again, right? So the strength of authentication in this case is minimal. But if you are not using a trusted, if you are using a non-trusted endpoint from a non-trusted environment, from non-trusted network, you are outside of company's premises. Okay, let's apply more restrictions. Something like, oh my god, you need to provide not only your password, but you need to prove your possession of a certain token, and we do need your fingerprint, and we're gonna prompt you for your credentials once per 30 minutes period. Something like this. Okay. So basically, there's a whole market of security solutions called identity and access solutions that provide identity and access management as a service solutions. These solutions are usually referred, nowadays these are referred to as identity managers. And again, these identity managers, they provide identity and access management as a service. It's a solution for this set of problems. What else? What else should we know? If you are using a standalone identity manager, right? I mean, standalone meaning it's not integrated with or EUC. So basically, you got this. You got only this. But you might say, okay, here we were talking about traditional business applications, right? What about mobile applications from a corporate catalog of mobile applications? They're not there, right? They are still somewhere in our IdAM console. These are not available in Identity Manager's console, right? So again, we still have this separation. This thing is isolated from that thing. Two distinct consoles, no integration, at least for now. Right? Okay, but still, that's a call for integration, right? But we'll discuss the synergetic effects of integration of these two consoles later. Right. Okay, that's all.